All right. Well, hey, mediums, welcome to Under the Iceberg, the show where we dive under the surface of authors' careers to find their keys to success. We brave the ice, plunge under the facade of success, and resurface with the will to survive. Or at least we're trying to survive. We have Steve is already surviving. So today we're really fortunate to have Steve Beaulieu, one half of the publishing house Athon Books, and also an accomplished author in his own right. You can currently find most of his recent work under the name not Jaime Castle, Jaime Castle, and that's Jaime. If you're going to search for it in Amazon. So, Steve, how are things in Texas? Because it's cold.
Great, man. Texas,
it's cold in Oregon.
It's okay. Relatively speaking, it's a little bit cold here. We've got an ice storm sort of coming in over the next couple of days, and when we get ice here, it's catastrophic because there's no salt trucks. There's nothing. I mean, you could probably remember, I think it was last year or the year before when we had Ice Mageddon, and the whole world criticized us for not being prepared for something that hasn't happened in over 100 years. So I think that we've shored up a bit, and I mean, we don't expect anything like that, but Texas is great. I love this place. It's I always say it's really nice to not live in America.
The Americanist of America.
Right. So it's great. It's great here.
I lived in El Paso for 4 years in the Army, and I loved El Paso. That was actually my first major move from Oregon, and it was, I mean, it's a weird place. It's the desert, so it's not kind of like Texas, but not necessarily Texas.
Like the armpit of Texas.
Kind of. Well, it's like the tip of Mexico.
Right. I've never been to El Paso, but it's on a list of places. Like Texas is so freaking big that I grew up in Florida, where it takes 7 hours to get out of the state, but like once you're out of the state, you're out of the state. Texas, it's like it could be 14 hours tip to tip.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot to explore here, and we've been here a decade and haven't done hardly any of it. So
I know. Well, especially when you got small kids, traveling is
you bet.
Yeah. So I thought instead of doing the standard bio today, because we're recording, this show isn't necessarily going to come out today. It'll come out on Saturday with the rest of them, but we're recording on February 22nd, 2022, which is a lot of twos. We could call it the deuce. I don't know what if today's going to be a holiday that comes around, but I thought it would be fun to start thinking back to January 11th, 2011, and where you were, what you were doing, and what has led you up to today and where you are now.
It's a great question. And when you posed it to me earlier, hey, just, I thought, oh my gosh, that's genius. I don't know why I've never heard anybody doing this. January 11th, I wish I knew exactly what was going on that day. As a matter of fact, I could probably go on Facebook, right, and check my memories for that day, but I don't know how you actually do it by day. So I could tell you what was happening that year. 2011 was sort of the start of a major transition in mine and my wife's life. We'd been married for about 6 years at the time, and we were working. I was a pastor at a church in Florida. But at the time, there was sort of a glass ceiling there for us. I was a touring musician leading up to that period of time. And so I was still working at the church, but like I would start a ministry, hand off a ministry, start a ministry, hand off a ministry. And I sort of handed off everything to a point where I had nowhere else to go. So we were praying about where we were going to go, what we were going to do. And an opportunity arose for us to learn Dutch and move to Belgium. And there was an apartment for us above a church there. And the pastor there I'd known for a while. He's like, listen, if you guys come out here and do ministry with us, we'll just let you live there for free. You do whatever you want, as long as you're just here to do work with us. And so we were learning Dutch in 2011, and it didn't happen.
Okay.
I felt like it was something, it's weird to talk about God things on a non-God show, right? But like, I felt like it was something God was leading us to do. And ultimately what I think was happening was God was preparing us to do anything. Cause like then the next step was Texas 6 months later. And I didn't know Texas existed, right? Like it was not even a blip on the map for me. If somebody said, where you want to move, like Texas might've been the last state I even thought of. Cause you think of steers and the other thing that rhymes with steers and
Beers. Lone Star beers.
Beers. That's actually perfect for Texas. And like you were mentioning with El Paso, like I thought it was just this desert wasteland with cactuses and tumbleweeds.
Mhm.
And that's an ignorant stance to take, but like Looney Tunes and John Wayne was my impression of Texas. So the end of the year came around and an opportunity came up for us here in Fort Worth. And we had already been prepared to make a giant, massive move to Europe. The step to go 1,500 miles to Texas was nothing. So our transition from metal musician and pastor to taking quite honestly, a huge step down to come to a church here in Texas. 2011 was a weird year of transition for us, but it ultimately led me to what I've been doing here for the past decade. So it was a good year.
So one of the things, well, if I say the word failure a lot in our questions, it's not because we think you're a
failure. I failed a lot, man. I failed a lot.
So, well, I think thinking about that as like you were gearing up to do this, and then you say you took a step down, like that might have been seen as like, okay, I'm not being chosen, or I don't get to do this really cool thing that I thought I was going to do. Can you walk through your thought process as you kind of embraced the new opportunity?
Well, so pastoring is a weird job to begin with, because unless you're doing it dishonestly, you don't make a whole lot of money. It's and I say that with all the love toward every pastor I know, but like, the Joel Osteens of the world are Joel Osteen, and he's making a butt ton on books as well as everything else. I was making peanuts. As a matter of fact, I worked full time for like 5 or 6 years at that church for $100 a week, literally full time. So I was chasing money with graphic design and spending money like crazy touring. And, again, another industry you don't make any money in is music unless you actually go somewhere. And 2008, we had a contract from Warner Brothers Records on the table. And the best decision I ever made in my life was to not take it. We'll leave that in a way that was a failure. We had just spent 4 years of our lives building up to what we expected was to go touring. And we did a lot of tours with Ozfest, and we played with just about every band that was popular at the time. But then Warner Brothers was sort of courting us, and the contract came. And as a 26-year-old or whatever, like it was nice. It was like a, $250,000 contract for 3 books and touring and all this. But then you find out sort of later on how the industry really works. And during that period, there was a transition from CDs to iTunes, and the record industry still didn't count digital sales as real sales. So like your advance, which is your, $250,000 that's supposed to go to 5 people to tour with, etc., was nothing. It might as well have been zero money. And yeah, the record label covers the costs of all the things that you need to do, but that money just gets tacked on to the end of what you owe. And, Jared Leto, the Joker, right? He's the lead singer of 30 Seconds to Mars. As of a few years ago, he owed the record label $1.8 million.
So you would have actually owed the label for that advance on royalties?
So the way the advance on royalties works is that you basically owe them money. It's not quite like the book industry where it just doesn't work out that way, in the same facets. So we would have been, it would have been honestly, I think pretty catastrophic for our lives. I was married then for 3 or 4 years, and my wife and I have a tremendous relationship. We don't fight at all, but like I look back and I go, I don't know what would have happened to our relationship if I actually ended up doing I'm sorry about all the binging. I have been trying to figure out how to turn off my notifications for email. It won't go off no matter what I do. So forgive me. It's binging.
If anybody wants to know the reality of Steve's life, just count the bings as we're having this conversation.
I got a new computer. It's a Mac. It's the same I've been using for 15 years of my life. And for some reason, every time I turn off the notifications, it goes right back on. And I can't figure out why. And it's driving me insane. And I keep waking my kids up at night because people email me at 4 a.m. and bing them. And they're like, Dad, your computer's making noise. So anyway, big tangent there. Sorry. That's a failure as well. I failed to learn how to do that. So, that was 2008, and I have no idea how we led to this question.
Well, I think we got into obviously you walked away from something important. Like that was a hard decision that was focused on your art. Like you kind of had short-term gain and maybe that carrot dangling in front of you of because it sounds like you had been touring. So it wasn't like you were going to get to go tour based on this contract.
You're just going to get to do it in a way that wasn't, indie band in a van pulling a trailer, driving, because we would tour like 3 or 4 nights a week all over the sort of southeast region of America, and then no matter what, I'd have to be back Sunday morning to preach and teach and lead worship and
Oh, because you technically were working
still
as
work for
well.
the
Yeah.
church. So it was a lot of driving, and so there was the opportunity to do it. I hate to say legitimately, but legitimately. Um, Oh, and then you asked, yeah, so there was a step down when we did come to 2011. Although I was making very little money in Florida pastoring, I was a pastor. And so when
Mhm.
I took this job here in Texas, it was to become sort of media guy.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So that was kind of the step down
that was the
technically.
step down. And so I even,
Yeah.
flew out here in February of 2012, and they're like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I'm a pastor. I don't know the answer to that. I do graphic arts. This is, it's something I do. And honestly, I thought that was going to be the end of it, right? Like I thought they were going to hear, well, media guy wants to be a pastor. We don't need a pastor. We need a media guy. But ultimately, they brought us on. And over the next 7 years, of course, I did become a pastor at that church. And then there was the political nonsense that happens in churches, and all the young guys got fired. Um, but it was great timing because Rhett and I had been discussing starting Athon Books, and he had quit architecture same year, 2018.
I was gonna say we were in 2018 now. Okay.
2018, we had written Web of Eyes, which was the first book. As a matter of fact, I think we wrote the first three books of Buried Goddess Saga, and we wrote Luna Missile Crisis together. Luna was the very first one that we ever wrote, um, and it didn't come out until long after Buried Goddess Saga. But we had gotten at the time, pretty substantial advance for the audio for Buried Goddess Saga, and we kind of started feeling like, hey, we sort of know how to do this. This is something we enjoy. We know how to do it. So we've been jokingly kicking around the idea of starting a publishing company. I'm like, no, I'm a pastor. I'm going to retire a pastor. I don't really think that that's sort of in the cards for me, if I could say it that way. And then August 2018 rolled around, and I was on vacation. And while I was on vacation, I got fired, along with another guy. So when I got back, I did a few things. I started a church immediately, um,
Okay.
and it was, by all regards, pretty successful. We were in a house, and we had like 60 people in the house by week 10. And once again, I just felt like I was hearing God say, "This is not what I am telling you to do." And I went, oh, okay, well, I guess this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I called Rhett, and I'm like, listen, I don't know what I'm doing here. Um, what are you thinking here? And he's like, well, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. So that was August or September of 2018. November, we had our first launch for Athon Books. As a matter of fact, our very first launch was our own book, Web of Eyes. I don't really consider that the launch. Our inaugural flagship release was Make Me No Grave by Haley
That's
Stone.
right. I like
And
that book.
friggin' phenomenal book, right?
Right.
And sort of all that came about because weird westerns are very, very difficult to sell. And Haley had been shopping
Mhm.
us all around to every publisher alive, and every publisher pretty much said the same thing. We love it, but fill in the blank. The fill in the blank was like, we want more of the fantasy, we want less of the fantasy, we want, there was just so many things. And Haley was like, that's not the story that I told, and I don't really want to change that. And so Rhett and Haley knew each other through Random House. They were both Random House authors, and she and he were talking, and we decided that we would take on this book, and had no expectations because it was a weird western. It was a one off standalone, and next thing we know, we blew it out with it, and it did really well. I would say really well for a weird Western, but not even that. It just did really damn well. Uh,
Mhm.
so that kind of gave us some encouragement that, oh, hey, we actually can do this and we know what we're doing. And so we spent the next couple months gearing up. And 2019, I think we had maybe about 70 releases. 2021, we had like 190. And then 20,
That's a pretty good leap from, how many in the first year you said,
well, we went from like 63 in
six. Okay, so you
2019.
kind of were ramping up from the beginning
Yeah,
as
and we
far as.
doubled. Of course, in this industry, the indie industry, you get one book, you get three books, right?
Mhm.
Because you got to really do a trilogy to get anywhere. So, and then you got box sets, and so I think we had 63 or so in 2019, 170, 190 in 20, and then last year I think we did like 250, and that was where we realized that is the cap. Um, Rhett and I, no intention to speak down to anything going on in the industry, but we're very focused on the authors, and we don't want to do anything that would jeopardize their ability to sell books, because ultimately we want every single book we put out to be a hit. Most publishers kind of are able to pick up stuff, throw it at the wall, hope it sticks. We don't want to do that at all. We want everything to be a hit, and we want to do fewer books without the hope. In other words, we want to make sure. So
Mhm.
250 is it. We can't do more than that. We won't do more than that. So we pretty much hit our plateau, in a good way. I mean, we're not looking to do more. We had one company try to acquire us, and they're like, "Well, you guys could be doing 800 books a year if you had a staff under you." And we're like, "Well, we don't want to do that, because then we'd be gypping our authors." Gyp? Am I allowed to say gyp? Is that a politically correct
Let
term?
me beat it out.
Um,
Let me check the glossary. Right, I don't. Well, I think one thing that you learn that it's an industry that's continually changing, and so I think it sounds like you've got a really strong understanding, or at least as best you can, of the current state of where indie books are. So um, I want to back up a little bit, because I we're focusing on Athon, and I want to talk about Steve. So or I think
Yeah, that's fine.
because
Yeah.
no, well, we will talk about Athon. We still have like 10 years between January 2011 and February
Yeah, I did jump
2022.
right to 2018, didn't I?
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds like, you, between making music and trying to be somewhat commercial with music, and then also having led ministry, like you personally have, like, you're not as afraid of maybe jumping into things or building something. Um, but can you talk about when you first started writing? Like, one of our questions is how many trunk novels you have, but I think, like, when did you first? Because amidst all these other creative endeavors, like, when did you sit down to start writing? And when did that become novels? And was that something solely for you that was out of, because these other artistic pursuits you're kind of talking about feel to me like that's about people and gathering people together and communal events. And while a book is definitely that, you got to start alone in a room, writing it. So can you talk about that? Maybe what you learned in first starting that and what kept you going?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to the start, because this is a question
Mhm.
that's always asked, is like, when was the first time, right? I remember writing my first, what I considered to be a book. It was really probably a short story, right? Like when I was like 8.
Uh-huh.
My grandfather got a Tandy 1000 computer from Radio Shack. It's sort of that all-in-one thing, and he had a word processor, and then they had this really basic art program. And I wrote this sort of book. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. I don't know how long it was at this point. And then I designed the book cover as an 8-year-old on this Tandy 1000. And so that was the very first thing that I did fictionally that I can recall. From there to 2017, when I finished my first novel, I had started 30, 40 books, and I didn't understand how to finish a book. Um,
Mhm.
as a matter of fact, one of the things that I feel like I learned more than anything else is how simple a process it really is. Um, Not easy, simple. Um, I have binders and binders of books that are, 70, 80, 90,000 words long, that had no direction, and they were just really just words on paper. Um, 2017 came around, and if you're okay with a story, here's the story.
Sure. When you say religious words on paper, you mean you just sat down and wrote and ended up with 90,000 words? Or
Yeah.
were they actually religious stories?
I mean, it was a book.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Like I can think of, one in particular was my first fantasy novel, and it's sitting at like 93,000 words, but it's only like halfway through the book. And
Gotcha.
I got
Okay.
overwhelmed because I didn't understand the process. And I'm sure if I went back and looked at it now, it's garbage. It's I could say that it's probably um, technically written well. In other words, I'm a writer. I know how to write it right, but the story probably just doesn't work at all.
Mhm.
So
Okay, back to story. Don't mean to derail you there.
yeah, no, it's fine. So in 2017, I was a worship pastor, and this dude came into our church. Never met him before in my life. He got off an elevator. I was walking through the lobby. Just had this weird feeling come over me. I look at him. I go, "Do you play guitar?" And he says, "I play bass." I'm like, "Cool, you're playing bass for me from now on stage." And I'd never done that before in my life, ever. I didn't know who this dude was. He could have been a satanic drug dealer out of, it could have been anybody that ever existed. And here at the church, I'm like, "You're going to play bass for me." Well, then he went on to, he has lymphedema.
Mm.
So I was one of the hospital pastors, and I mean, we all were. And my hospital day, I went to this hospital, and it ended up being him in the hospital bed, and he was a train wreck. I mean, just looked awful. And I went, and prayed with him, talked with him, and I said, "By the way, when you get done, you're playing bass." And he's like, "I don't know, man. I don't know." I'm like, "No, you are. You can play bass." So he gets out of the hospital, and a week later, he's at church. I'm like, "Cool, you're on schedule for next week." So he starts playing bass, and one day he invites me over his house to see the Oculus Rift, which
Oh,
is
nice.
before the Oculus Quest, before it was sort of a standalone. You had to plug it into your computer. I was interested. He's like, "Why don't you come over?" And I go into his house, and I see this bookshelf, and all of the books had his name on them.
Hmm.
And I went, "Do you write books?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Man, I've been trying to write a book my whole life." He goes, "Let's write one together." Okay. So in about 2 months, we wrote a 100,000 word space opera.
Mhm.
Book one. I knew nothing about the industry. Zero. As a matter of fact, I thought that we were supposed to be focusing on paperbacks. Like everything I did was intentional for like a physical book. The
Mhm.
idea of Kindle didn't mean anything to me. So we finished this book, and shortly after we finished it and we were talking about how to release it, I was at Half Price Books, which I don't know if that's a nationwide chain, but I was at Half Price Books, and I was looking specifically for Ready Player One. Um, I knew I could go to any other store and buy it, but I'm this weird guy that treasure hunts, and if I don't find it where I want it, I don't get it, right? So like I wanted Ready Player One. I was going in there for like 3 weeks, and every time I went in there, I accidentally picked up the same book, and I kept forgetting that I picked up this book, and it ended up being Soda Pop Soldier by Nick Cole, um, which is oddly because it's a lit RPG, just the same regard that
Yeah, it
Ready
is, isn't
Player
it?
One
Yeah.
is. And I didn't even know what lit RPG was. I don't think the world knew what lit RPG really was in 2017. But man, I just kept coming back to this silly pink book on the shelf, and I kept picking it up, and I went, finally, I'm going to get it after like 3 weeks because I keep going back to it and not even remembering about it. So I go home, binge that thing in like 2 days. At the end of it, I look on the back cover, and it's got freaking Nick Cole's Facebook page, like with numbers at the end of his link, right? Like on the back of the
Yeah.
book. So I go, why not? So I message the dude, nicest dude in the world, gives me all the advice he could ever give. Great advice for 2017, horrible advice for 2021. Um, but at the same time, like he was just so open to this process that he was just giving me all the stuff. And so one day he goes, "Hey, I need you to meet somebody. He's also a pastor." Turns out he was an elder, but it doesn't matter. And he says, "This is Jason Anspach. Meet Jason Anspach." So like Jason and I start talking, and I designed the Galaxy's Edge logo for them, and I helped them get the original artwork for the series through an artist that I knew. And then a short while later, Jason says, "Hey, I want you to meet this guy, Retzi Bruno. He needs a logo done for something called Sci-Fi Bridge." So Rhett and I start talking about Sci-Fi Bridge. I do the logo for him. He had read that book that I co-wrote with this dude, Aaron.
Oh, really? Oh, so you guys did publish the book?
We published it. It did what I thought at the time amazingly. It didn't. I mean, it maybe sold 1,000 copies and had, I don't know, 60,000 page reads or something like that. And I thought, that's the greatest thing ever. There's people reading my book. And by no means is that not good, but like it wasn't what I thought it was at the time.
Right.
And so Rhett and I started talking, and he had read some of what I wrote, and he went, "Hey, I really need somebody." And we had been talking for a while, so he kind of got to know my personality. He's like, "I've got this idea for this book called The Luna Missile Crisis, but it needs to be funny and campy and pulpy." And Rhett is a depressing writer. If you've ever read anything from Rhett C. Bruno, he is dark, depressing, phenomenal, but like not fun campy. He's like, "I want to co-write this because I really need that element in there." So then we wrote Luna together. Since then, I've written, I don't know, 18 books or something like that. And I'm currently working on 13 books. You asked the question, what's in my unfinished trunks? I don't know. I've got 3 or 4 that are done. And then whether I'm co-writing or writing alone, I've got like another 13 that I'm working on, which is an absurd number. But,
but these are meant for publication. Like these aren't books that you abandoned.
Right. No, there's some that have been either acquired in audio, right? Like I've got contracts on projects that I won't get to for the next 3 years. But I don't know.
They're coming.
It's coming.
Well, one of the questions we have is about networking. I guess I'll jump ahead a little bit because we're kind of talking about that. In that early time, like were there lessons you took from ministry into the publishing business that you learned, or failures you made maybe in networking and reaching out to people and building relationships back then when you were first starting?
I think that the success of Athon Books is completely built on networking. The success that I have as an author is completely built on networking. I just told that story, right, of Nick Cole, and if it hadn't been for Nick Cole and the people he introduced me to, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today. I think pastoring has been instrumental in my career as an author. I often say that I pastor our authors and they have no idea. One of our authors today who, dude texted me this morning. He's like, "Hey, will you pray for me? Because I've got this thing going on." And this dude's not like church going Christian or anything like that. It's just when you have in your mind that people matter, people matter. And to me, it doesn't matter if I'm selling books or if I'm pastoring. Like really what it comes down to for me is the authors and the readers. As a publishing company, we don't sell to people. We sell to a machine. We sell to Amazon, and Amazon then sells to people, right? Like no matter what I do, we're not going person to person trying to sell it. We want that big Amazon audience, and we have to hit algorithms and all that. But on a micro scale, if the authors are unhappy, they're not going to write books. If the readers are unhappy, they're not going to read books. So we have to sort of establish those networks and those relationships. And at one point last year, I had to tell all of our authors, you got to just stop messaging me for a little while. I was getting 3,000 messages a week on Facebook Messenger. And that wasn't an exaggerated number. I looked at my screen stats one day and I saw that number. I went, I gotta do something about this. And it wasn't just authors, the Athon readers message us all the time, and we love talking, but at some point it was just becoming so overwhelming that I couldn't handle it anymore. And so, but I've gotten back to a point where I'm like, okay, we can reintroduce this at a slower rate.
How are you doing that? I mean, do you like set specific time that you look at Messenger or?
No, I'm terrible. I'm that guy that like, if somebody doesn't text me back immediately, I think that they've died. So I'm that responder. So like if somebody texts me, I pretty much respond right away. But I think that that break sort of stopped it. And now it's like, it was almost just like that snowball effect where you had to just stop the snowball. And what that did for us is it let our authors know anyway that emailing us is the best course, because Rhett and I share an email address. And so a lot of those messages were like, hey, can you
You
do
never
this?
knew who I'm talking to.
Yeah, yeah. And part of that's purposeful, part of it's not. I have a signature on my email, Rhett doesn't.
Mhm.
You know, but like if you email like if the authors email us, we both see it, we could both respond. So many of those messages were like, hey Steve, can you do this? I'm like, oh, that's Rhett's job. And the
Gotcha.
authors don't know. So like
Mhm.
hundreds of messages a week asking me to do things, then I have to go to Rhett and go, hey, can you do this? And if you just focus things, but it's just us two, you know, and
Right.
we have some 1099 employees and stuff that help us in different areas. But when it really comes down to it, it's just me and Rhett. And we sort of like it that way, but at the same time, it could become overwhelming and exhausting.
Well, looking back to when you guys started, I don't obviously things are, you've touched so many lives doing this, and that feels for something that was a natural extension, for you. Would you say there were things that, I don't know if you call them failures, but that you would have done differently if you could go back and set things up? Like, would you have a team, as if these people are looking at potentially making acquisition offers because they think that maybe you're, vulnerable that way or something, are the things that you would change, you know, or is it pretty much the way you conceived it is the way you're happy with things going?
It's really weird because I don't know that Rhett and I had any plan outside of we know how to sell our books, let's sell other people's books.
Mhm.
But he and I talk about it all the time. Athon was a $4,000 Kickstarter that became a multi-million-dollar company in
Right.
in 3 years. It's hard for me to look back and complain about anything. Um, there's some very small things that we did throughout the process that sort of pissed some people off that I wish I could go back, and it was out of ignorance more than anything else. Um, so on a very micro level, there's some things I would have done differently. On a macro level, I can't complain. I don't know how this happened outside of Jesus. I don't know. I have no answers. And Rhett doesn't either. He's like, hard work. I'm like, sure, but a lot of people do hard work. This has been a tremendous 3.5 years for us. And it's I don't even know how to talk about it, honestly. It's just been crazy.
It's I see a lot of people transition from that, sort of like being writers going into either publishing or then author services. And it feels like there is a huge need in this market for people who can just make sense of it. And it feels like that's something you and Rhett have been able to do. Maybe not even make sense in the like forever, but in you see the way things are happening. You've got a sense of the way things are coming, and even helping shape it at this point as you're publishing your own work and figuring out kind of where the ends of your capability is or something like that.
Well, Rhett is the guy that informs Amazon when
Mhm.
Amazon's having a problem.
Yeah.
Rhett knows everything that's going on at every single moment in time. As a matter of fact, we see, sort of uproars in the community that we've been dealing with Amazon with for 2 weeks. And
Mhm.
it's because Rhett is so on top of everything. You say he's got stuff, we've got stuff figured out right now. Like, unless he dies, like Rhett, the dude pays attention to everything. He and I both know the top 100 books every day, on both Amazon and Audible. Like, if we don't know who's selling and why they're selling, then we're not doing our jobs. Um, I don't say that arrogantly at all, but it's just interesting to me how many authors exist in this community who don't know what's going on.
Right.
And it's so vital to know what's going on so that you're actually positioning yourself to be successful in the industry.
You talked about with that first book, the level of sales that you had, and that was like success for you at the time. Was it in talking with other people and learning from people like Nick that, okay, this is how you started kind of understanding the way it works?
Oh,
Because sometimes
Rhett just told me he didn't sell
Brett
well.
just told you.
Oh yeah, he's like, what do you? That didn't do well. Um,
Yeah.
he'll argue that today, for what it was and who I like, a debut author to sell 1,000 sales, um, and actually get page reads and stuff like that. It is good. I mean, even looking at our catalog with Athon, I mean, debut authors are very difficult to break in, very difficult to sell. If it's not super on market, and I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, debut authors, it's hard. It's very hard.
Right.
But Rhett just straight up told me, he's like, that's,
Mhm.
It's good for you, but it's not good.
But it sounds like you had an interest in the business, because some people, like, that could be a mistake to try and take on too much, focus on the thing that you do well. I mean, is there advice you would give people that maybe when you were making that decision, um, that a different way to think about it, or has it always just been kind of that's what you're interested in, and you could both write and be aware of the industry, and it didn't kind of stifle your creativity or anything?
Um, I've always been a multitasker. Always,
Yeah.
like I'm one of those guys that I can't sit for an hour and do something. I have trouble sitting through a TV show without looking at my phone or getting up and going to do something else before coming back to the TV show. So like for me, it's very natural because I'll write for an hour and then I'll do something else and then I'll design some book covers and then I'll do something else. And so like that's just it just flows really well with my personality. Rhett and I did a talk in Vegas for 20 Books to Vegas. We were asked to talk about the publishing industry. Uh,
Hmm.
and we were very blunt. Like, first of all, we were like, hey, just so you know, we've been asked to tell you how to do what we do, and that's stupid. Why would we tell you how to do what we do? That's not necessarily what this is going to be about. But, there was, I don't know, 50, 70 people in that room. We expected 4 people to show up. Like, we didn't know that. And what we did was we looked around and we saw a lot of authors that wanted to start publishing companies.
Right.
And one of the very first questions we asked was, do you know how to sell your own books? Because what we find is a lot of authors think that because they can't sell their own books, why don't they sell other people's books so that they could actually make money in the industry? And like, that's the most backwards thinking imaginable. If you can't sell your own books, you have no right to sell anybody else's books or to try. And so everything that we did was birthed out of, we've done this for ourselves. Rhett way better than me at the time. So let's expand and see if we could do it for others. And we started small and then went, oh, we could do it. Let's do it.
Hmm.
We got tremendously lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it. Like, we started out with Paul Anthony Jones, who has passed away since then, but Paul was a huge 47 North author, and 47 North just made a bad decision, in my opinion, and they didn't pick up his next series, and I got it, and it was a massive bestseller, and it was one of our first launches. And then we got Joshua Gayu, and we relaunched his Commune series because he didn't really know how to sell ebooks. He was huge in audio and just didn't know what to do in the ebooks. So then we got to relaunch Commune, and those two specifically like put us on the map, and gave us some substantial presence in the industry. Uh,
Hmm.
and we learned a lot over the years. We learned how hard it is to sell certain genres, how hard it is to sell debut authors. Um,
Are there lessons you've learned with relaunches? Because I think some people may hear that and be like, "Oh, I got a series I could send your way."
it's really hard.
Yeah.
There's no guarantees. The examples that I could give are we can tell you the very successful ones and we can tell you the failures. A lot of times with relaunches, we don't want to relaunch it under your name. Amazon is very name oriented, and so the metadata that goes along with your name determines whether or not your next book is successful. So if you've already failed with a series, the chances of you being successful with your next series are pretty slim.
Hmm.
It happens, but like generally speaking, your name loses value in the Amazon algorithms the more failures you launch. As a matter of fact, one reason I'm Jaime Castle is because I did a bunch of anthologies. I ran this superhero anthology thing for a while, and I had five superhero anthology books, and like they sold pretty well, but at the end of the day, they didn't sell as well as a novel would have. So like in Amazon's eyes, my author name was a failure. So instead of trying to, I don't know, rebuild that name, I just started a new name, and it was a phenomenal decision. Um, and then on the other side of things, why didn't your book sell?
Hmm.
There's a lot of questions there. Was it because your book cover sucked? Was it because the book sucks? Was it because you don't know how to market? Joshua, for instance, Joshua Guy, you just didn't know how to market. His books sold bonkers on Audible. Of course, he had R.C. Bray, but like still, they sold bonkers.
Right.
We knew that they were popular and should have an audience. But you're welcome to sell relaunches. I'm sorry, you're welcome to submit relaunches. But just understand that we're going to have a much different conversation regarding your relaunches than we would if you brought us a new series or, whatever, because we want to make sure that we're doing a good service for you as well as for us.
Are there lessons you learned on the business side as you've come up? Because I'm hearing you saying a lot of things that are very, oriented around the both taking kind of this artistic endeavor but applying business to it. Are there some hard lessons or failures you had along the way, like where maybe you took a chance on something that didn't work out the way you expected it to?
Yeah, I mean,
Book-wise?
I would say this to sort of jump off of your question there. I don't think what we do is an art.
Okay.
Really honest. As a musician, as a painter, artist for years, um, this isn't. If you want to make money, this isn't an art. This is an industry where you're writing to make money, which often means writing what people want to read and not what you want to write. I've been very lucky in my writing career to not count on my writing career to pay my bills, because Athon did what it did. At the same time, I was sort of coming up as an author. And so Rhett and I write stupid crap all the time that we know isn't going to sell. Luna Missile Crisis, we had no hope for that. And because it was a standalone, and of course then Audible Originals picked it up and sort of it did what it did, and it did okay. But then Dead Acre, which is our biggest title in existence at this point, we're doing a 3-book series, partnering with Blackstone Publishing on that. And it was a weird Western that we had no hope for. As a matter of fact, it started as me just having this idea for a character. I wrote 10,000 words. There was no story. It was just James Crowley doing things. And Audible Originals, after Luna Missile Crisis took off, they approached us and said, "Do you have any short fiction around 30,000 words that you'd like to submit to us? We'd love to publish something from you guys." And we didn't really at the time. And I told Red, I'm like, "Well, I've got this 10,000 words, and I think the character's great. The voice is great. I just don't have a story." So we sent that 10,000 words to Audible Originals, and they loved it. And they said, "Okay, finish it." And even up until the moment we launched it, we had no hope for it. It was just a thing. But then Audible Plus released at the same time, and we were one of the very first Audible Plus free, with your membership things. And, it went from no hope to #1 in the Audible Plus catalog and over 100,000 listens. And, I hesitate to say this, but that project was a mistake.
So how would you take that going forward then? Because it kind of sounds like you're saying two different things here. Like I fully understand, and I think there's a powerful lesson in approach things from the reader's perspective, and taking that there's a technical aspect of doing that consistently. But now you also take chances and try something different. Like how do you balance that, or how would you tell an author to balance that?
Rhett balances that for me.
Okay.
Rhett is the business guy. And I said before that what we do is not an art, and I want to back up on that, because I'm an artist. Everything I do in my life is revolves around art. I write because I love writing, and I don't care if it sells. Rhett's the one that tells me, "Don't do that. It's not going to sell." And sometimes I listen, sometimes I don't. I have a superhero series that with Christopher Vallon that I knew was a bad idea, because I know the superhero market. Whether people want superhero books or not, the categories are just absolutely devastated by lit RPG books. So there's no way to get visibility in the superhero genre. Even look at the Marvel stuff, like nothing in Marvel sells, nothing in DC sells. Like it's just not a prose field at this point. But I loved the idea of this Raptors series, and Chris and I really wanted to write it together. So Rhett and I talked. He's like, "Okay, here's what we do." And he had the business plan, and the business plan was honestly fail-proof, because Rhett just thinks that way. And, it went from this is not going to sell at all to we made a deal with Audible, and, now they've got 600 to 1,700 ratings on each book in that series, when it really would have probably gotten 50 ratings if we would have done it some other way. But Rhett balances me in terms of here's the business move. You do what you want, but this is how you have to do it business wise.
So it sounds like having that oddball project that you're really interested and excited about, but have a plan.
Have to have a plan.
How are you going to sell it, right?
For sure. I mean, we get all these submissions all the time about really crazy sounding stuff that the two of us go, God, that sounds great. We don't know how to sell that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ultimately turn down that submission. Like it's really hard to tell an author, you've got a great idea. Your first 50 pages were fantastic, but there's no way to sell this. You know, I said it before, you know, Rhett and I will take chances on our own stuff that we wouldn't advise authors to take chances on. And I think that's difficult sometimes for our authors because they see us doing things we tell them not to do. But the caveat is, first of all, we have very established names at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, we're doing things behind the scenes that we honestly can't do for every author, right? I can't make deals with Audible for their Audible Plus for every author that comes along. We have that in through our Audible originals and stuff. And so honestly, yeah, we're in a different boat than a lot of people where we can take these chances. But there's been plenty of things that I told Rhett I wanted to write, and he's like, don't do that. And I went, okay, I won't do that.
So it sounds like learning how to communicate with your business partner has been a very important thing as well.
Yeah.
Or at least just listen.
Yeah. And he's always right when it comes to business.
Mm-hmm.
He's younger than me, which makes it really hard for me to say that. But he's got a smart head when it comes to making good decisions. My advice to somebody who wants to write something that's not to market is, yeah, got to have that plan and don't just release it because it's done. I've got books that I wrote 3 years ago that I still haven't released because I don't have the right plan for them. It's just part of the industry.
Back to the trunk list, right?
Yeah.
Are there other things you would consider failures of craft that you've learned that maybe aren't related to the idea or the theme piece, but maybe in the voice or plot, character, things like that?
I mean, I've got failures like books that I've written that I know just aren't something I'm going to release. So, you know, you asked about the trunk. There's several books that are done that I'm never going to release them. And it's not even necessarily that they're not good. I just know they won't sell. And unless some weird plan comes along to make them sell, I can't risk a failure with the Amazon algorithms. I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but having released 600 books with Athon, we've seen data that, like, I know there's a lot of people that have data. I don't know that there's anybody in the industry, like in our circle, that has the data that we have, because we watch everything and we kind of figure out, well, why didn't this sell? And I just can't bring myself to release something that I know isn't going to do well just because I wrote it and I want to get it out there. So I do consider those failures. I wasted months of my life writing on stupid things that I knew I shouldn't have written to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but you enjoy doing it, right? So
I
guess it's like writing a song. You know, that was the Smashwords acquisition. Like that was the thing I was thinking about, was like all the data that Smashwords has, which maybe isn't amazing sales data in volume, but they've, like, I don't know of another entity that has that length of data around ebooks.
Yeah.
Would you consider releasing something that you knew was going to negatively impact Amazon, you know, releasing it wide or through other markets if it was just something that you enjoyed? No.
I am the absolute opposite of an advocate for wide. We've tried it. There's no good reason to do wide in the sci-fi fantasy market. I could probably do a whole show on that, and then I'll have a bunch of people that will disagree with me because so-and-so that they know does really well wide. But, like, you know, we've had massive hits that we brought wide sort of afterwards, and the sales are 1,000 to 1, 100. You know, it's absurd, like, to give up Amazon, KDP, KU to go wide when the market's just not there. Romance thrillers, I'm not in that, right? I hear that all the time. Well, romance does really well. Well, that's cool. Sci-fi fantasy, the market is on Amazon. So what I would do, and I am planning on doing, is maybe releasing some of those things as another pen name that I don't care about. Just to have it out there. But I haven't made that decision yet to do that.
How do you feel about your choice of Jamie Castle as a pen name? Would you do something different with a pen name that you chose in the future, like initials or different part of the alphabet or things
No,
like that?
I've kind of clung to it. I mean, originally Jamie Castle was supposed to be a pen name for me and Rhett together. Uh,
Hmm.
and then we got a big deal with Audible, and Rhett's like, "No, I want my name on it." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. I don't want my name. I don't want Steve Beaulieu." So I said, "I guess I'll just be Jamie Castle." The only thing that I would have done differently, maybe, is spell it not Jaime, so that people don't have to ask me, "Is it Jaime?" But even that, I did it because Jamie Lannister is spelled that way, and I wanted that like
Right.
subtle Jamie thing, right? And Castle, of course, is just a fantasy stupid thing anyway. And then at the end of the day, JC is my boy, Jesus Cristo. So why not have it?
Well, I think castle is also, it's a strong word. It's a image. It brings, things to mind. And you're right that evocative of Game of Thrones. So there's a lot of, I think, background there, like for your genre that makes
It
sense
was
for that name.
purposeful.
Yeah.
We wanted to, so I think that's probably another thing is just be intentional with the things you
Mhm.
do. Don't we have a lot of authors that get really hung up on book names and book covers, and we want this scene, and like I constantly am telling people, book covers sell books, not stories. Look at any Forgotten Realms book that is in existence and try to find a scene in the book that is represented on the cover. It's not there. Nobody cares about that stuff. They do something that sells the book, and then nobody goes, "Well, this scene wasn't in the book," because it just doesn't matter. So just like be intentional with the things that you do, and realize that you're trying to sell books. That's the goal here, is to sell books.
Have you had any covers that were, quote unquote failure that you thought were going to hit and didn't for whatever reason?
Um, we've redone
Hmm.
100 covers, right? Like, you get the cover and you think the idea is going to work, and then it doesn't work, and you just kind of throw that money away and move on to the next cover. We have one project, not my personal project. As a matter of fact, I think I love all my covers. That's probably one of my favorite things. I have all my covers up on the wall. I'm the
Hmm.
guy that has a cover to a book before the book is written, because it inspires me to write the book. But we had one that was maybe my favorite cover we'd ever done as a business, and it was for Derek Allen Sitaway and AJ Cerna for the book God Mode. It was sick. I mean, it was this big giant orc, big axe, killer cover, some of the best art that we've ever had. We launched it, and the first day it got so trashed on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram. I mean, across the board as a World of Warcraft ripoff.
Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, the artist was a World of Warcraft artist.
Uh
Uh,
huh.
and so, like, it was intentional, but not to rip it off. I mean, you couldn't find that art. It wasn't art from Warcraft. It was custom art for the project. But it got so reamed that we backed up and punted. And I found one of my other authors or one of my other artists. And I'm like, "Hey, do you have anything that works?" And he had actually the perfect cover for it already made. And I just kind of bought it as a pre-made and switched it out. But that was probably our biggest flop. Um, Felt catastrophic at the time, and of course you then apologize. You're dealing with the authors. I mean, we made a decision, they were in on it, right? Like, it's not like they were blind to it. We keep all of our authors very appraised of everything that we're doing, but that was rough.
So that wasn't a case where like maybe negative publicity was going to help the book. No.
uh, it could have, sorry, it could have, but we didn't want to take the chance.
Right.
um, there was the chance that it wouldn't, and so I don't ever want to risk an author's opportunity over, hey, maybe this will work.
Yeah.
If it's not kind of tried and true, I'll test stuff on us. Rhett and I test stuff on ourselves all the time. um, but not on our authors, unless they come to us and like, hey, I have this idea, right? And we go, it's a good idea, I don't know if it's going to work. We'll lose money, but not at the author's expense.
Hmm. It's business. Is there, so when you look back at the guy who had just lost his job, having moved his family across the country, is there a skill or a thing that you felt you had learned that you could articulate to someone who might be going through the same experience that has helped you roll with those punches and move on to the next success, without being trite and saying like failure is success? Not that you're trite, that I've heard that said before. But you know what I'm saying? Like, is there something that, because it looks to me like you've just done, and maybe you've been kind of grown up this way to look for these opportunities because you're in an industry where things change all the time. But is there something you think that has helped you through that, aside from, your faith, obviously? But
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Because my
yeah,
answer is I don't know how anyone does it without
right.
Jesus. That's always going to be my answer. It's hard to separate the faith because I don't think I would have been. I don't think I would have made it through some of this stuff that I've been through in my life otherwise. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
without preaching, like people say Jesus is a crutch. Absolutely. Broken people need crutches. I've been broken in my life, and I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with admitting that. But on maybe a personal level, you said don't kind of leave the trite out, failure, success, or however you want. But like you can't have true success without having failures.
Yeah.
Failures lead to learning about the process, and the hard part is when you're an artist, you tend to take things very personally when it's really business. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in this industry, if a book fails, a lot of people think I must be a terrible author. And the reality is that good books don't sell because they're good. Books sell because they're marketed properly, and then they keep selling because they're good. Like that's such an important distinction to make. We have authors all the time that just think their books are going to be the next Harry Potter because they're so good. And first of all, Harry Potters don't happen anymore. Just in reality, we there's 1.6 billion books a year released on Amazon. It's not the same as it was 25 years ago. There's a never-ending stream of readers out there that read a book a day. I have one reader in Athon that reads 3 books a day. He doesn't
Wow.
remember the first book he read when he finishes the third book he read, right? Like we're in a Netflix binging sort of mentality. And so it's very hard to have a hit um, like we've seen.
Do you
So,
see increasingly, I guess this is a related question. Do you see increasingly just tighter and tighter niches on very specific types of genre, or even within, like, say, lit RPG or mill SF, or, and that's what the readers are looking for?
yeah, we watch that market pretty closely. Here's a for instance. 2 years ago, VR lit RPG was really big. Character
Mhm.
study in a virtual reality game. Now everyone's sick of it. Now, sort of the new thing is like slice of life farmers, right? Like books. I'm doing.
Stardew Valley.
I've literally got a book cover that I'm working on right now. That's a slice of life farming book, and those things change so often. And actually, the market, like for instance, in science fiction and fantasy, specifically science fiction, like the 99-cent book. I'm sorry, 99-cent box set is a thing. Lit
Mhm.
RPG, it's not a thing. Um, those readers look at it and go, well, that must be crap because it's 99 cents. Lit RPG is a full price launch uh, genre. You launch it at 4.99 and it still sells. You try to do that in sci-fi as a non-established author, good luck. It's a 99-cent launch genre. That doesn't mean the books are any less good. It just means that the readers have been trained for a certain thing, and that's it.
Mhm.
Fantasy tends to be a free genre. Like they want the first book free, and then they'll go on to the series. And you kind of have to know each genre and subgenre and how it's going to how the launch process looks, because you can't talk to your buddy who writes romance and do the same thing. It just doesn't work. Did I answer the question, or did I get sidetracked?
Absolutely. I feel bad because I kind of went back because I was curious about this in the moment, and I had my big wrap up question, which was the but I mean, I think that it's a feeling I've had for a long time, is that you look at Netflix, you look at, just media in general, that we're just getting increasingly niched down, where you've got folks, and romance kind of demonstrates this. You know, you meet the readers like very specific needs, and things will be okay. If you try to do different things, that's where it gets dicey. Where even what you might think of as being straight up mil SF or fantasy or whatever isn't quite as specific as you think it is. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's things like I had an author ask me, "Hey, can we put the sexy girl on the cover of my military
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi?" And I went, "Well, it's not the genre for that." Um, Without getting into all the semantics of what readers now, don't get me wrong, because I know you've actually written in like the Aeon 14 universe and stuff where that does work, right? I mean, am I right that that's a thing?
Yes, I think it's a little interesting because, well, yes, and that's very much Mal's. My books not so much. I've got the spaceship, you know, firefight type books,
Yeah.
whereas Mal's books tend to have the women on the cover and things like that. So,
It's just
but it's the brand. It's the
it's
brand for that.
interesting because the readers, the military sci-fi readers, are totally cool with hot, sexy chicks,
Hmm.
but they don't want the hot, sexy chick being the main character.
Hmm.
Right, like there's distinctions to be made. Like they're mostly veterans who want to read about their life as a fantasy, right? So like they want to expand. I don't say that negatively, so sorry if you're listening, I don't mean it that way, but like we tend to want to read about things that we've done, and potentially like people who have done it better or have done the things that I wish I could have done, that would have been amazing. And so like in military sci-fi, no, don't put your hot chick on the cover unless you know that that's your audience. For us, that's not how it works. And so I just said, no, I don't think that's a good idea for sales. Maybe if it was urban fantasy or one of the markets that does kind of appeal in that regard. So you just kind of have to know the market,
Right.
and we could always be wrong. I want to throw that out there. We could always be wrong, but like until we're wrong, we don't want to take a chance in being wrong. If that makes sense.
No, I think and even Aeon 14 is a good example where someone could look at that and be like, well, this must be Space Opera Mill SF. But the thing is, Aeon 14 has become its own brand in a lot of ways. And so folks looking for that they're finding specific things. And the covers have even developed over time to reflect what the readers, the feedback they've given. So,
And it's also really, really important to remember that you cannot ever look at outliers.
mhm,
Like you can't look at Craig Allinson's Expeditionary Force for any kind of inspiration on what to do, because Craig Allinson's Expeditionary Force went viral and it went nuts. You can't look at Galaxy's Edge; it went viral, it went nuts. You can't look at Drop Trooper; it went viral, it went nuts. I could go on and on about the algorithm hitters,
mhm,
and I can then find 50 other books that are, forgive me, Rick Partlow, as good as, but didn't hit. Right? Like that's just the industry that we live in. We set things up for Rick Partlow, and Rick Partlow, of course, worked very closely, but we did everything we did intentionally with him. But Drop Trooper went nuts. Wholesale Slaughter did like middling, right? And other books of his, they all do well, but like we haven't repeated Drop Trooper in the same regard that like other authors, I'll just not put their names out. Like we have authors that have made $1 million on a series and
yeah,
then released a new series that could not sell a book. And that's why they're with us now, because what happens a lot of times is authors have their success. We always say a general blanket statement is like an author gets one big series. That's it. I mean, there's going to be outliers that you've got series after series after series, but like people follow series, not authors. As a matter of fact, I heard a very interesting explanation of this one time. Somebody said, "What authors do you like reading?" I think it was at 20.
mhm,
Somebody said, "What authors do you like reading?" Like, I don't know. Well, what do you read? I type in dragon books
right.
in Amazon and I read whatever the new dragon books are. And they have no idea who wrote them. They'll never go back to that author. They don't follow on Amazon. They just type in dragon books and they read the next dragon books. There's probably a billion people who just write military sci-fi and they just read whatever they haven't read and they don't care who wrote it, and they'll never go back to that author unless they just see another book that the cover appeals to them.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, you're gonna want to like choke me through the screen, but I read Wheel of Time recently, like kind of based on our, because I want to know like why is this? Started watch the series. I thought it was not my favorite. But like, why is this so popular? And I feel like if Robert Jordan had started writing currently, like he'd potentially, I don't know if it would have hit in the same way because Tor sent a copy of Eye of the World to every bookstore in America. But everything about the way that series was conceived could potentially have made a ton of money on Kindle Unlimited from page reads.
Absolutely. And look, Tor did something 35 years ago that we're doing now, and that is they gave a free book.
Right. Exactly.
They just went, here's our new book. And like that was brilliant because at the end of the day, Robert Jordan, I don't care what we can argue about this. Josh Hayes and Hank Garner and I did a Wheel of Time podcast that we quit
Right.
on, right? It is a Lord of the Rings ripoff, period. Now, granted, there wasn't much to compare to at the time, so I get it. Like, I'm not faulting him for it, but it was Lord of the Rings not done as well. And you've got to get to everyone I ever talked to is like, you got to get to book 4. I'm like, I can't get to book 4. I don't care if it becomes the greatest thing ever written. Like, I couldn't get past book 2. I don't care what color the tower is on every hill in every city, and I don't care about that stuff. And that's what
he'd been making so much money per word, man. On Kindle,
he was writing per word.
Yeah.
And so, anyway,
I guess
I don't like Wheel of Time. I respect Wheel of Time, but I don't like it.
And I look at it as like, why is it, we talk about series that hits and you've got one series, and I don't know, what is it that makes one hit over another? And when you have that one that hits, how do you figure out how then to transition into being a potentially longer series and keep writing it? I think that's probably conversations. We could probably have a whole show about that too, as well.
No, Wheel of Time hit at a good time. It was a great time. People were desperate for fantasy. By all regards, it's a good series. I mean, I'm not gonna fault like the fact that I don't like the writing style but I will say this: everyone keeps saying greatest fantasy series, like best-selling fantasy series of all time. Twilight sold 3 times as much.
No, you're right.
12-book series, 3 Twilight books, 12 times as much. Now that might change now that Amazon has a show, but everyone hated the show, so I don't know that.
No, I think if he hadn't died, he would still be writing them, because there are things he was setting up to obviously continue. I think it was mismarketed. You're right. I think it's a Lord of the Rings ripoff, and it was conceived that way in the beginning. And then when he finally got through his initial contract, he started doing other things with it. But you're right. I'm trying to look at what makes a series, if you get one series, like approaching it from a technical aspect so that it, I don't know, you're thinking about those things. I think it's really important for writers to do that.
I think that it's impossible sometimes to figure out why something hit because the answer is luck. Rhett and I are very honest with our authors that there is a luck factor. When it comes to Amazon, algorithms change monthly, tri-monthly, whatever it is, right? And we're constantly watching the algorithm shifts. But Amazon doesn't tell us what the algorithms are. We don't know. We just have to figure out. We try new things. When stuff stops working, we try new things. And then we find the thing that works, and it works for a period of time and then stops working. And like, for instance, Rick Partlow, we did for Wholesale Slaughter was the first series we did with him. We did the same thing for Wholesale Slaughter that we did for Drop Trooper. The only difference was that as soon as Drop Trooper started really taking off, we dumped a ton of money into it. We went, this is going, we're going to, and on the flip side of it, like we were making the money to dump into it, right? Like we can't do that with every series. And it's not that we only advertise series that take off. We advertise everything we have, and we spend a ton of money on every project that we have. But like when something hits, you want to keep it going. And so Rick, you said, how do you transition? Rick got to, I might be telling secrets I shouldn't tell, but it's fine. Like Rick got to a point where the series was over, and we had a discussion. And I think I told you this before the show started. I'm like, you're writing this until you die or Jesus comes back. Like, that's it. Like, this series is still selling. It'd be stupid for you to stop. And for every one reader you get that calls you out on that, oh, you're just milking it for the money, you've got 500 other ones that are happy to keep going on the series.
Right.
We get fixated on that one troll who, who cares about the trolls? We all have trolls.
there's so many writers. I've been thinking about this recently. Like so many writers that only produce like 16 books in their career, maybe, or even 12 books in their career. And I think back, like, I just wish I had more books from that writer, even if it wasn't that one series, I wish I had more. And we don't, because that was where the industry was back then, and
Well, even Stephen King, I mean, the reason he wrote as Richard Bachman was because the
right.
publishers told him people only want one book from you a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true, because they all bought the Richard Bachman books and everyone knew it was Stephen King,
It was
right?
Stephen King, right.
And now they even say Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman on them, because it's a different world. But like Rick publishes 10 books a year and they all sell.
Mm-hmm. So. I know he's got hard decisions to make about what to write at this point because more drop trooper. Well, I think we're at over an hour now. So I should find like an elegant way to wrap this up. And I already like shot my load with the question I had. But I think, Dean is much better. And I forgot to say at the beginning, I apologize. Dean couldn't be here today because he is in the throes of bringing a new human into the world. They just welcomed a baby last week, which I think is number 3 for his family at this point. So they're hard at work. So he couldn't be with us for this show. But
it's a way to put it.
Yeah, I know. Well, I have a 4-year-old that just runs me ragged, so I can't imagine 3. And you have 2 or you have 3?
I have 2. I have a 4 and a 7-year-old.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, but it sounds like the ministry and your faith have helped you, but also a willingness. It sounds like a willingness to reach out to people and ask questions and learn, and not be ego driven about what you're willing to learn is kind of what I'm hearing over the course of your career, and not being afraid to admit if I made a mistake and I need to do something differently, or I need to adjust my way of thinking, because my goal is to, sell books. And I guess we didn't get into what sell books means exactly, but it's to support yourself. And you're obviously well beyond that at this point, but does that sound like, does that sound like true?
Well, there's a question that we always ask authors, and that is, what does success mean to you? Because we have some authors that don't care if they make money at all. They just want their books out there, and they don't want to do the work to put the books out there. And that's a challenge for us, because as publishers, our job is to make money and make authors money. And when you come to us and you go, I don't really care if it sells, that doesn't make us care any less, but it does make us go, okay, so what are you going to do to help this sell if you don't care that it's going to sell? Because we're the first ones to admit that every author needs to do work. It doesn't matter what publisher. You know why Tor has so many failures? Because their authors don't know that they're supposed to actually help. And then the question is, do you know how to help? And the answer is, posting your book cover on Twitter 3 times a week is not helping anything. People see book cover.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, right?
I put so much work into Twitter.
Yeah, well, it's Instagram, right? Like, I can't tell you how many authors I follow that just literally just put their picture of their book cover on Instagram. There's no comment, there's no hashtag, there's no, help support me, go buy my book. There's nothing. It's just, here's the book cover. And we're so inundated with ads and pictures of things that, like, man, just about 3 months ago, I told everybody on the Steve Beaulieu, on my personal Facebook page, that I'm Jaime Castle. And there were people on there who have known me for 20 years who are like, holy crap, I always wondered why you posted this guy's stuff all the time.
They didn't look at those author photos. I guess one might be slightly more stylistic than the other. I think they're both
now they're exactly the same.
They're both pretty suave. Oh, okay.
But the point is, like, you have to, if you don't know how to sell books, ask us. Like, if you're working with us, even if you're not working with us, dude, email me, message me. I don't care. We're always willing to help give advice on your projects. And even Dean will be the first one to tell you. Dean came to me with a project. He goes, hey, what do you think of this? I told him all the reasons it's not going to sell. At the end of the day, he made some decisions there, and I'm glad he did, because he didn't quite. He even said to me, he's like, I didn't even think of that. I didn't even know that, right? Like, people saw Dead Acre and they're like, oh, Weird Westerns are selling now. And I'm going to tell you, like, they're not. We got lucky. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We made some good decisions. We got Roger Clark to do the narration. We had a badass book cover. We made deals with Audible to like get it in front of people and stuff like that. But I didn't expect that series to sell. So just because a Weird Western sold doesn't mean Weird Westerns are selling.
Right.
So you got to learn the industry. And I know that's a hard thing to say, but like Josh Hayes publishes with us because he doesn't want to be an authorpreneur. He hates sort of the marketing side of things and all of that. And sometimes you just have to admit to yourself, I don't know how to do what I'm doing. So what do? Maybe I find a publisher. And we could do a whole show on dispelling the myths of a publisher, right? Like, I can't tell you how many authors think that we're going to change their voice because we edit them, right? Like, that's not a thing. It's not a thing.
I think it would be great to talk too about how an author can support a publisher, because I've, friends that are trad side and all they do is complain about not getting support from a publisher. And so I don't know what, they'll have, or they have marketing people that get swapped around. They don't know who they're talking to anymore.
Close my door real quick. My kids are home.
Oh, okay.
I'm on a podcast. Sorry. Just had to let my family know. We've changed hats.
No problem.
Did you change your hat?
Huh? No, same hat. I just adjusted it.
Oh, okay.
I tend to like pull it up and I get like some good glare on my head. You have much better lighting than I do. So
well, all I was saying was that, there's a lot of authors, they just don't know how to sell books. Actually, I think you were talking.
I think it's pretty common. I don't know. One of us was saying it, I'm sure, at some point. Oh, well, I was just saying that like that was basically what, we mentioned that even on the trad side where you think people are going to get more support, they don't. And that's probably another great show to talk about, like increasingly like little difference between people call Athon an indie. I don't know. I hear this. I don't really think you guys is that necessarily, but differences between the way people are supported. I don't know. I don't see much difference from the author side from what I'm hearing from people, except that you're getting more support and people that know the industry better from, a publisher like Athon, who is much more closer, I think, to how the market is working.
Well, we're definitely indie. I mean, there's, right.
You still think yourself that way?
Yeah, we're not big four, and there's no such thing as a non-indie. I mean, Blackstone calls themselves an indie publisher, right? If you're not big four, you're an indie publisher. Are we a small press? Maybe not anymore, right? Like so
you're not basing that like on sales or anything like that. It's just
that might be indie is just we're not supported by a big four publisher.
You're not owned by a German conglomerate.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the more fun things that we've seen over the years, authors don't want to sign with the suits, right? And then we'll watch them go sign with the suits when they say no to us. Meanwhile, we're in our boxer shorts chasing around our kids all day. There's a huge difference in our mentality to other people's mentality because we are authors. And I wish more people would sort of recognize that. We're not hurting. I don't mean it like that, but like, I wish people would recognize the difference between an author-run publisher and a publishing house that is fixated on what the newest trend in the political market is, right? Like, I'll stop there for sake of not stepping on toes or anything like that. But like, at no point in our career did we go, what's going to socially be the thing to do, right? Like, because our focus is to sell books. We are a bookseller. We are capitalist booksellers, right? Like, I don't know how to say it differently than that. Like, if you want somebody that wants to sell books, let's sell books. If you want somebody that's going to make news because of X, Y, and Z, like, that's not what we're interested in at all.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Well, and I think that the effort you put into authors and even in supporting authors, like from a contract level and then other, opportunities that people are getting, like there's some great stuff there. So I think people, if they're considering that, should definitely, I don't know, I would recommend definitely talking with you guys.
Thank you. I would also say to any of our authors that are listening, if you don't feel supported, that just might mean you need to reach out. The difference between somebody who puts out a book a month and somebody who's doing what we do is that we just don't have time to individually always reach out to you personally. But like, I think even James, if you just need something, just let's talk. We'll talk for 5 hours. I don't care. It's just, we need to know that you need something to be able to do something. So I hope that makes sense.
I think it does. I think I have questions about like decisions you're going to make in the future, but those are not part of this show. So maybe we could do something because I think it's just a really exciting time. It's really exciting to see how things are going for you guys and you personally and how your work has changed over time. And it's been, I don't know, it's been really cool to hear because I feel like there is, if you're in the trenches putting in the work and maybe you're doing one thing that's not working for you, I think Steve's story is a great example of how transitioning and being open to change and listening to people, you're going to get there. Just don't stop. So, yeah, Steve, thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
So, all right. Okay. I think I will hit, end broadcast for folks. If this is abrupt, please forgive me. So.